plus or minus 200 diagnosed cases today. Jeanine Anderson was going to be here with me to help moderate. However, Jeanine is appearing by phone because Jeanine is under a voluntary 14-day quarantine. She went skiing this weekend. She was in Eagle County, and the Colorado Department of Health yesterday requested that all individuals who have been recently to Eagle, Summit, Gunnison, Pickett, voluntarily quarantine themselves, and so Jeanine is quarantined. Obviously, legislation is changing rapidly. As of Friday, there was proposed national legislation. I don't know if that will be signed today or if it already has been signed in the last hour or two. Grocery stores are a challenge for everyone. So at any rate, there was for those of you who are participating by Zoom, I have the ability on this end as a Zoom conference to mute and unmute you. If you would like to speak, please electronically raise your hand. There's a little button where you can raise your hand. If you're joining us by phone, please voluntarily mute your phones, and when you want to speak, unmute them. The only thing I request is that we try not to act like the Democratic debates and all talk over each other. So this is going to be the way we're going to be communicating, at least for the next couple of weeks, months, if not longer. And so please try to bear with us as for some of you, this may be your first exposure to Zoom, and welcome to it. Zoom is one of the video conference services that is out there. Just for what it's worth, there is a free version of Zoom that is out there. Similar, I think you're going to see Microsoft Teams, you're going to see Skype used more and more by people in the next several months as they get used to remote working. With that, Colorado last week, Governor Polis signed the health legislation. Jeanine, if you're on, would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Yes, I am here. Hello all. Yes, on March 11th, the State Labor Department published emergency rules related to paid sick leave. These rules only talk about or address the period of time when an employee needs to figure out whether he or actually has coronavirus. Doesn't address the period of time if you are in fact quarantined and are found to have coronavirus. If this does not address that situation, it addresses a period of time of up to 4 days to get tested. And it's limited to certain industries. The industries that it deals with are leisure and hospitality, food services, child care, education, including transportation, food services, and other related work at educational facilities, home health, if working with elderly, disabled, or otherwise high-risk individuals, nursing homes, and community living facilities. It requires employers to step up and pay for up to 4 days. We have not yet addressed, and I think we're still waiting for some rules with respect to other wage replacement options, including perhaps unemployment insurance for those that are found to have coronavirus and are out of work for an extended period of time. So all we've addressed so far is the testing period, and that even with respect to that, that's only for certain industries.
Thank you. Just so people kind of get used to how this can work and how you can share information, since we're not all here at a seminar to hand out materials, if you would like to see a couple of resources that I put together, they are available to anyone who sends an email to town.hall@seserman.law. There's an auto reply that's set up, and you will receive those. Again, it's town.hall@seserman.law. Seserman, Seserman.law. And again, the reason I did that was just, I think it's important that everybody get used to how we communicate and how we can share and disseminate information. You know, as lawyers, we're all impacted, obviously, by the courts, well, at least those of us who are trial lawyers. It hasn't been widely, at least as of an hour ago, had not been widely disseminated. Chief Judge Brimmer in the U.S. District Court issued an order Friday evening that effectively is grinding to halt jury trials, grand juries, and other proceedings in the U.S. District Court. What state court judges will do when the chief judges get together later this week is a bit unknown at this point. But it, it certainly has the ability to impact all of us. There are employment law issues that come up. A lot of our clients have closed their offices. People are being asked to work remotely from home. I should note that there is a video that is available. It's a free LinkedIn Learning that's one of the resources that if you, again, you send an email, you'll receive, that talks about remote working. Being a member of the LawBank community, at least personally, one of the advantages that we have is that a lot of us are used to remote working. But that's going to become, in a lot of ways, the new norm. Am I losing you? With that said, I open it up. Does anybody want to say anything? Jay?
Have the county courts, has Denver closed the state court or the county
I
courts?
haven't seen anything.
I had heard that county may have closed. Sorry, Jeanine, you were
Go ahead, somebody was going to speak.
Sorry, I'm just going to jump in here. On the Colorado Judicial website, there are links to each district and specific guidelines with respect to if you're supposed to be a juror, for example, and have symptoms, how you're supposed to contact the court and let them know that you're not going to be there, what you're supposed to do if, a bunch of different scenarios, and every judicial district has different rules. So if you're supposed to appear in front of a particular judicial district, I would recommend that you go to the judicial website and click on the link for that particular court.
Joan Reardon, are you on? Hopefully, maybe. Guess not. Okay. And I may call out to her several times. She's going to try to join us. Joan is the general counsel of the Colorado Coalition for Homeless, very much at ground zero of this, and an organization that, quite frankly, has been way ahead of the game in terms of disaster planning. Let me kind of open it up. Does anybody have any questions, comments they'd like to make, see how they've affected things? I really don't want this to be a lecture, but I'm certainly prepared to keep talking.
Well, from a transactional standpoint, where I come from, this has had a big impact on
And this is Jay Camlett.
people's perceptions of what is happening or misperceptions of what is happening. They think just because rates are going down that will be a harbinger of good things. Actually, I had a transaction where the rates got so low that the borrower didn't want to borrow and the lender wouldn't lend at those lower rates, so that they agreed to a floor, somewhere about a point above where markets were that day. I think what this may be a good harbinger for are refinancings of home mortgages. It's certainly going to, there's going to be some time before the commercial credit markets really start to get a hold of what it is they're willing to do, even with 0% rates. A lot of lenders don't want to put money out at 2% or 3%. So my loan in particular closed at $390. My deal. I don't know what 30-year mortgages are, but I've heard there's been some disruption in the mortgage market, despite the reduction in rates that will hopefully calm down shortly. So I think from at least a real estate vantage point, there's gonna be a couple weeks of wait and see before things get normalized.
Anybody else? Please join it. Yeah.
Hey, David. Thanks for doing this. This is Mark Solomon.
Hey, Mark.
I've of course, like everyone else, been more addicted to Twitter than usual. And I've noticed in some places, New York, some other places, moratoriums on foreclosures have gone into effect. And I'm wondering if we've heard anything about whether that might happen in Colorado, and if so, whether that's a statewide issue, whether it's a county by county issue. Because I've got a few clients who are potentially facing some foreclosures for other reasons. And I wonder if that's going to impact that. Does anyone have an idea?
Well, this is Carolyn Topelson. All I can say is I have no idea, but my understanding is that all of the stops of foreclosures are for current foreclosures, not ones that are already in progress. In other words, what I've been seeing is my understanding of what I've seen is people saying we're not going to allow foreclosures to occur as a result of people getting behind these months on their mortgages because of the coronavirus, but it wouldn't give leeway or a green card to those people who already are in foreclosure. But I have no idea, and I think it's going to be, unless the state issues something, it's going to be a county by county situation, and frankly, a bank by bank situation. And I think the same thing's going to happen in landlord tenant law, which is where my worry is that I'm going to get all these calls of people wanting to evict, and ethically, I'm struggling with that. Of how do I advise my clients of saying, hey, work with your tenants right now because we're in a crisis situation, which hurts their bottom line because they can't pay their own mortgages if this is their only way to get that money. So I'm actually wondering from an ethical perspective how to advise clients on this. I have no idea.
Thoughts?
So this is Laura Toole. I just received an email this morning, and I'm trying to find it in the plethora of emails, that they're putting a stay on the FEDs for right now. And I just received an email from District 18 that they are closing. My hearings have been removed. And I have Division 3 in District 18 is closed until April 1st. So I don't even know if we're going to be able to get in front of a judge with regard to FED hearings if they do let them proceed. But I have an email from Denver that says that they are not having FEDs right now.
I haven't seen that email. I'll have to check my email.
Have others seen any communications about deadlines? For instance, what happens if a statute of limitations is running
That's what I was wondering.
and there's no way to file something or to communicate? Are electronic communications enough? I think of part of my practice is employment law. When a 90-day right to sue letter issues, it typically issues via mail. Well, what happens if an office is closed and you don't receive that mailing? Again, I raise the issues. I am not suggesting that there are easy resolutions. I don't know how a judge right now can hold a jury over the course of several days. Certainly a lot of people I've talked to said if the person next to me sneezes, I'm leaving. And I don't care what's going on. Somebody just unmuted. Please.
I've also been questioning the same thing. Sorry, this is Carolyn again. About what happens if you have a motion before the court and you're coming up on the 69-day, because it's a post-trial motion, or a 14-day, if you have a clarification question on an order, how do we deal with those if the courts are closed? I've been wondering that, or is everything just told? I have no idea.
Well, wouldn't that be a basis for some stay agreements between the lawyers, or would that not be in the defendants anyway, or whoever is affected, would that not be in their best interest to agree to that?
Good question, or is it jurisdictional?
Well, some of it is like 45 days to file an appeal. Like we're waiting on a final order of a case, but we know we're going to have some post-trial stuff to do, which is going to have to be done within a certain amount of time under the rules that could affect any sort of appeal. So then the question is, how do we, even if we agree to stay it, how do we get the Court of Appeals to agree that we haven't passed a jurisdictional time frame if it's based off of a certain date?
Well, I think you still have
you can't really agree to that anyway, Carolyn. I mean, that's a jurisdictional deadline. I mean, you can file a post-trial motion in a timely way, and then under, I think it's Rule 59I or J, I can't remember which one, you know, that motion is automatically deemed denied in, I think, 63 days from the day you file it if there's not a court order denying it, and then your deadlines under the appellate rule, whichever it is, 3 or I guess Rule 3 or 4, start running on when your notice of appeal is due. And I assume, given electronic filing, you'll still be able to satisfy those deadlines. You may run into a problem when the court says you got to get the record compiled, and you say, well, I can't because the record is in the clerk's office in, you know, Denver District Court, and they're closed. That might give you more time there, but I think the jurisdictional deadlines on appeals, you should still be able to satisfy those.
But how does, I
through
mean,
electronic filing.
Mark, how would you suggest that work if the courts themselves are closed? I guess that's where I'm struggling. We just file
Because I don't
anyways?
know that- well, I suppose if ISIS or whatever, Colorado e-file closes, if we get some order from the Chief Justice saying, look, we're shutting down all e-filing, then I assume it's going to say something in there like, so because you're not allowed to file a complaint or a pleading in any court and you can't do it electronically, I assume that means they'll probably also be forced to issue something saying any kind of jurisdictional deadline, whether it's a statute of limitations, whether it's a court order deadline or a rule order deadline. I assume the order would say those will all be stayed pending further order of the Chief Justice. But my guess is that the electronic system will continue to run. The e-filing will run even if the courthouse itself is physically closed. I mean, what that will really do is greatly prejudice pro se clients who
Right.
don't have the ability to file. I mean, I assist a few clients who are pro se, and I provide them some limited representation, and you know they have to physically file in the courthouse because they're not allowed to electronically file. So that'll be a whole confusing situation for those people.
I agree with you. You know, one of the interesting things is a little segue, but with the prevalence now of remote working, one of the issues that's going to come up is capacity. For instance, we're all on Zoom. I mentioned that there's a free Zoom service, but there's also an announcement with Zoom that said unless you upgrade, it's going to be very limited because the capacity demands are there. It's a bit like when the Rockies were in the World Series a few years ago. If tickets were going on sale at 2 o'clock, good luck getting through. I read this morning that Microsoft Teams was down because so many people are trying to remote work in Europe that they're having difficulty getting through. So I think that's some of the challenges that we'll all face. Joan, were you able to dial in?
Finally was.
Okay.
Talking about technology difficulties.
Let me introduce you. This is Joan Reardon. Joan Reardon is the general counsel of the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. Joan and her organization are way ahead of the game in terms of dealing with highly contagious diseases, with a lot of people in small spaces with disaster planning. She's been kind enough to join us. Joan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, sorry for the delay. I was really having a problem getting into the meeting, and we experienced that on an internal telephone conference call this morning where people couldn't get in. Anyway, as David said, I'm with the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and we have a lot of different functions at this agency. We operate a healthcare center for low-income and homeless individuals. We also operate about 20 multifamily apartment buildings for people who were previously homeless. We have doctors, physicians on staff, we have dentists, we have an eye clinic, and then we have case managers and behavioral health people. Because I think maybe because of our population, we were very concerned on how we were going to deal with this, and if there was an epidemic through the homeless community, how would that stress our resources? So we began actually last week with calls, and everybody on the executive team has to be on the call. There's about 18 people, so it's a large team. We divided up all our different kind of business units. So in terms of one individual being responsible for coming up with a plan in that unit, and then if we had to evaluate it or tweak it, that would happen during the morning calls. And I know that sounds very calm, but it was really chaos in the beginning just to get people to get assigned to the different things. And we've had an 8 o'clock call, I think, every day since last week and over the weekend. Some of the things that are really a problem, even at this point, are questions from employees on getting paid. We have salaried employees, and we have temporary employees, and we have hourly employees. We have the whole gamut. But everybody wants to know what's going to happen if they go into self-isolation because, number one, either they're trying to protect their family members from getting COVID, or they are, like we had one of our executives was over at the DMV on Friday and worked with that clerk who now came down with COVID-19. And unfortunately, we can't just take money out of our profit pool and pay people. We are a very fiscally responsible organization, and all of our money comes from grants which are already earmarked for different programs. And so if folks have not accrued sick time, we will actually be unable to pay them. We are doing what we call a sick time advance. So for 80 hours, we'll let people accrue a negative balance of 80 hours, which they will have to pay back when they're working. That was about the only temporary stopgap measure that we could do on this. And the other issue that we had is, unfortunately, too, if we do not bill for different functions, in particular our healthcare functions or operation of our multifamily buildings, we will not have money, or we can't tap our grant money to pay us. We only get paid if we actually perform services, even though most of our employees are salaried. And so I've looked into what coverage we would have on business interruption insurance, and I think if any of you have checked your policies, you really have virtually nothing for a disease like this. They usually don't cover epidemics, pandemics, biohazards, things like that. They're looking more at things like electricity going down, no water to your facility, and that type of thing. So financially, if we are not able to bill what we need to bill, we're gonna have real problems internally. I'll just stop there and see if anybody had any questions on any of those, and I hope you didn't cover that ahead of me getting on.
We did not. Questions for Joan,
Okay.
anybody?
So Joan, are you anticipating there being any grant monies coming in from the state or feds to help alleviate your problems?
Dilemma? No, I mean, there's not any extra funds coming in. The only grant money we have, we secure every June, and it's specifically targeted for different programs. What's interesting is we have a grant from the city that originally came from HUD, and it went through Denver. And if some of you may know, we just opened up a hotel up in Park Hill that was supposed to deal with people in transition and some other chronically ill folks. The city's actually asked us to take that money or that facility and not use it for its purpose, and to use it rather to deal with the COVID situation. But the problem is, we've all signed agreements, and at the end of the day, we signed up to help a certain group of people and not just COVID people. So we're trying to convince the city that they need to put more funds into this, this whole medical fiasco right now.
Does anybody represent,
thing-
oh, go ahead, please, Joan.
Well, the other thing I was going to also mention, even though we're a medical center, we have to keep essential employees operating, and I think that would apply in any type of business, especially in manufacturing. You have to have, if you're running a manufacturing facility, you have to decide who essentially needs to be there to continue with the operations. Even though we're allowing some of our support staff, like accounting, primarily accounting, to work from home, we're requiring all our executives to be in the office. And the reason is to set the standard that we'll be here as long as any of our employees are here. It's kind of like we're going to go down with the ship, which is a terrible analogy. So it's really important, I think, to support those frontline people who are dealing with customers on a daily basis, that they feel like they're not doing this alone.
What kind of surge are you guys expecting of homeless cases given this crisis?
Well, we've had right now, we haven't had a lot of people test positive. We've had 12 people present, and then 3 tested negative, and we're waiting for the results on the other 9. I guess I think the bigger problem is if somebody in the homeless community does get COVID-19, there's probably a good chance they won't be coming in for a while, and then more people are going to get ill. When we do have people that present and they're sent for testing, then we actually are trying to house them in isolated areas. We have leased a hotel for that purpose, to have people be put up in those things. So if they turn out to be positive, at least they're not spreading it among the community.
I'm sorry, my question actually meant, I was trying to say to people who are displaced from their jobs that, are on the edge anyway. Are you guys anticipating a surge in homelessness in general?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so what are your estimates?
Absolutely.
Yeah, what are your projections?
No, I don't know that, nobody has that at this time. I mean, I know the mall stores are closing, and those are a lot of folks that are on the edge. I don't know what they're going to do if they don't have money saved.
Restaurants
So,
in Denver
and
are
when the
closing
stores-
tomorrow, as of tomorrow.
Yeah, I know, and
Right.
it's a terrible situation, so I can't tell you at this point. If people are closed and laid off, I would assume that they can get unemployment. They can apply for unemployment insurance, but I know there is a problem in getting that activated. It doesn't happen overnight. And I would hope that landlord would give these folks a little grace and realizing the situation, because if they start evicting tenants, yes, they're all going to be homeless. But if they do that, I don't know that they're necessarily going to get anybody to fill the space. So it could be a really bad situation.
Joan, when you guys are on the front line, has there been any discussion about whether someone who contracts COVID-19 in the workplace is perhaps covered by workers' comp?
Oh, good question, David. Yeah, actually, I did talk to Pinnacle, and they have several elements that they're going to look for. Of course, because we'd be dealing with the patient one-on-one, we'd have to have the subject patient actually end up testing positive. The workplace employee would have had to have gotten COVID-19 because it occurred in the scope of their employment when they saw that patient that tested positive. We have to document it in the EHR. And so we have a record of all that. But like workers' comp, as everybody knows, they are going to do their investigation, and at some time in the future, they will decide whether this individual is qualified for workers' comp.
Does anybody represent restaurants? Who's on the phone? And once, twice, sold.
What was your question?
Well,
I
just
can-
really what the impact is of, what they've seen is the impact of COVID-19 on restaurants. As you just mentioned, Jay, Denver is now going to close restaurants.
Well,
New York City is closed.
You can still do pickup and drive-through in restaurants, and it's unclear if it's just in the
Right.
city and county of Denver or beyond, because what I'm looking at right now, it's just says Mayor Hancock issued the order that effective tomorrow at 8 a.m. through May 11th. Their restaurants are closed.
And also, I think you can still eat outside. So
Mhm.
restaurants that have outside patios and those kinds of things will still be able to open, at least for outside dining at this point. And it just looks like it's just Denver at this point. My guess is the state will follow, but right now it does look like it's just Denver.
This is Elizabeth Savage. I saw a press conference this morning, and it was Mayor Hancock, and he was talking about Denver. I had heard that the governor was going to make some sort of announcement today, but as far as I know, that hasn't happened, just in terms of additional advice.
Anybody have any sense whether under the Stafford Act or otherwise, which is what President Trump used to declare a national state of emergency Friday, there's a chance that we're a bit like Italy. And what happens if that occurs? Does that happen on a regional basis? I know like New Rochelle, New York is on a citywide quarantine.
I believe Hoboken, New Jersey is too.
I believe that's
If
correct.
you look at the number of cases that have come from Eagle County and Summit County and Pitkin County, all related to people skiing with people from out of the country, I could see that happening where it might be a good thing too.
Could be. Which leads to some of the challenges of the grocery stores recently, but we're certainly not gonna solve that. Anybody represent school teachers, healthcare workers? Someone's about to speak, looks like.
I think
Go ahead.
there's another announcement coming out from Polis right now.
Is there?
I'm looking.
We're looking it up as we talk. This is ever changing. Jay, let me turn to you and ask a question. You're a tenant. You're in the real estate business. In terms of offices, what have you seen offices do, businesses, to decide whether they're going to take the proactive step of closing? And do you see in the next, say, week or so, landlords making that decision that the commercial office buildings will be closed?
Well, at this point, the notices I've gotten as a tenant here are that the building is gonna remain open. It is up to the individual business owners to decide what they're gonna do for their businesses. They are taking extra precautions to follow hygiene, whatever the current hygiene rules are, as far as the common areas, as is LawBank. Taking extra precaution as far as wiping down common areas, making sure that they notify people whether, if they are sick, telling them, if you think you're sick, don't come to the office, don't come to the building. But I don't see landlords taking that extra step of saying we're closing, unless they're gonna be ordered by governmental authority to close. I don't believe that they will. At least now, they're certainly not looking to do that. The ramifications of that are, what does that then excuse the tenant from paying rent for the time that they're not able to use their space? Right now, everybody is kind of we'll take care of our areas, we'll take care of the areas we control, but we're gonna let the tenants, make their own decision whether they're gonna stay open or not.
You mentioned some of those decisions. Clearly, as lawyers, something like Joan Reardon mentioned, business interruption insurance, something that ought to be looked at. Does it cover this? Probably not, but it's worth looking at.
I'm gonna talk to Damian Arguello and see if he has any advice on that. Unfortunately, he's not on the call, I don't take it, but,
How about a force majeure provision?
you know, it certainly would fall, to me, it would fall into one of those unforeseeable, things that are not within the control of the party that has to perform. Now, payment of rent typically in leases is not subject to force majeure. Certain actions, if a landlord's in the middle of constructing a space, or if the tenant is in the middle of constructing their space, there are force majeure provisions that apply. This probably would fall in that. If they cannot, strikes, lockouts, those kind of things certainly would, this would be in that category of unforeseen, uncontrollable circumstance. So I can see force majeure being used in a lot of instances, in a lot of commercial contracts, where there is performance to be had.
Andrew Lipscomb, you had kind of texted something on the internal chat. You want to unmute yourself? You still there?
Andrew's one of our landlord-tenant attorneys at Uptown.
Okay. I'm just, one of the things I think that we are, we're going to see in terms of remote working is sort of a change in communication technology. What we are doing right now.
He says he has no mic.
Okay.
That's why he couldn't talk.
Oh, let's see if we can unmute you. Let's figure this out.
He doesn't have a mic on
Okay,
his side.
got it. Thank you. You're going to see more, group chatting. Not just the traditional conference call, but the use of, as I said, things like Zoom that we're on right now. Certainly Microsoft Teams, Slack. You'll see more and more of that. That being said, and this would be a discussion for another day, certainly as lawyers, we all have ethical requirements that we need to follow about protecting client confidences, not to mention HIPAA financial privacy laws. That all comes into play as when we remotely work. I would posit probably a good idea that if you're printing off a document at home that has medical information of a client, you might want to make sure you shred it and not just throw it in the trash can. It'll be fascinating as someone who practices a lot with theft of trade secret cases to see what the reaction is when a employer requires an employee to work at home. That employee then has remote access, has certainly confidential information in order to perform her job, but terminates the employment relationship. Is there going to be some sort of a theft of trade secrets claim that comes out of it down the road? I don't know. I can just see this kind of stuff happening. Jeanine, I'll go back to you for a minute. Some thoughts you've got.
You caught me. I
right.
don't have any specific thoughts. I mean, I think all of this is kind of a work in progress. I think it's a very difficult time right now. I think it's very difficult to think through how to best advise clients that are presented with all sorts of very complicated scenarios where you're talking about, a sick customer comes in a restaurant, what do you do? Your employee's sick, what are your obligations? Who do you have to notify? Say, an employee is diagnosed at a restaurant. Are you responsible for trying to notify customers that came in that night? You know, what are your obligations? And I do think that probably what Hancock has done in shutting down most restaurant and bar operations for the next 8 weeks is a good idea. You know, and I do see that today that there will be a reprieve from evictions and utility shutoffs during the crisis in Denver only right now, not statewide, and that could be helpful in kind of preventing some people from ending up homeless. But with respect to kind of our job as lawyers and kind of trying to advise clients, I mean, I think we need to kind of, you know, what would a reasonable person do? And you know, and we have to really think long and hard about what obligations employers have to keep their workforce safe. How we best go about that. I mean, how far do you have to go? And these are tough issues and don't really have easy answers. I mean, we could try to help clients with this, but I definitely think at this point, you know, there are no answers and there's no kind of, you know, because these are really difficult times for business owners. I mean, all these restaurants, you know, they're shutting down. They're not going to have any cash flow, or they're, you know, really limiting the amount of business they can do. And they're not going to have cash flow. Their employees aren't going to have cash flow. These are really tough issues, particularly in things like food services and you know, I mean, because those people tend to live paycheck to paycheck. And so anyway, I'm just rambling, but you know, I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on some of the things that we should be advising our clients that come to us with tricky issues as to how to best manage it. And because the last thing you want as an employer is to have a situation where perhaps, say, one of your workers is sick and no one does anything about it, and that person ends up infecting someone else who gets really sick or dies. And what kind of exposure do you have as an employer if you didn't make the first employee go home, or even if you didn't shut your offices? I mean, you know, I mean, where is that line on what's reasonable under these circumstances? Does anyone have any thoughts on any of this?
And while you're asking people to think, let me just mention that administratively, everyone has been unmuted. So that way you can participate as and when you want in this town hall. But if you're not talking, you'll have to mute your mics on your end so we don't get too much echo. That being said,
I just want to add, Andrew Lipscomb wanted to add that some states have told their statute of limitations to prevent. So, but I don't know if that's an act of the State House, I would think, or if that's a judicial decree. And if our State House is closed, then who's going to make that proclamation?
Denver County Court has suspended all jury trials outside of criminal cases until March 31st until further notice. And everything is being just automatically postponed there, but none of the other ones have anything online at this point.
and that's trial, so you can imagine what happens when there is, let's say, a federal court proceeding and there's an out-of-state witness or out-of-state counsel. I don't see at this point any sort of judge anywhere ordering a witness from out of state to appear for a hearing, or a lawyer.
I did get one judge issued an order in their court that any non-evidentiary based hearing will be done by phone from here forward. I did get that from one specific judge.
You know, how can you even compel somebody to show up at a deposition, a party to show up in your office at a face-to-face deposition?
I don't think you can, and I think that, quite frankly, how do you require a court reporter to appear for a deposition? A court reporter or someone has to swear in the witness. I believe Colorado, if I remember correctly, rejected audio, or I should say video notarizations last year.
Right.
So you actually have to physically have a court reporter present to swear in a witness. Yet if someone starts to cough, that's the end of the deposition. So I think, as Mark, I think you're right, as a practical sense, depositions are going to come grinding to a halt.
Andrew just added that Adams County suspended jury trials for 2 weeks as well.
This is Elizabeth Savage, and I'm an estate planning and probate attorney. And while there's a lot I can do with clients over the telephone and can, send drafts to them to review, and
have to say? As far as depositions or notaries?
Yes, deposition.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just gonna mention that, you have to have, a wet signature, particularly on wills and trusts, probably on powers of attorney too. And anything that requires, a notary is gonna require in person. And so, I honestly don't know what's gonna happen. A lot of my clients are older, and, I'm not sure how I'm gonna handle that, and haven't had an opportunity to talk with other estate planning attorneys about what their thoughts are. I mean, I could volunteer to go to their homes, but they may not want me to go to their homes.
I was gonna say,
And
is there a mobile notary service?
There is an electronic.
there is, yeah, there certainly is, if people are willing to
To allow
the
you.
notaries are willing to do it, yeah.
Yeah.
And, that costs money, which normally if you go to your bank where you have an account or something, it doesn't cost money, or if I notarize for my clients, which is totally fine, I'm just saying, yeah, that I saw them sign this and it's their signature, that's all I'm saying, so.
But
Anyway, those are some issues that I'm thinking about and trying to figure out how to handle.
Related to that, John from US Legal just handed me what they're going to request if there are video depositions is the following stipulation. All parties have to stipulate, we can swear them in over the phone, and stipulate they cannot object to the use of the transcript later based on the administration of the oath. Does that cut? In this day and age, perhaps. I know, one of the other challenges that's faced, at least in Colorado with the court system, is the court system, the official transcribing system is the FTP recording system. I believe, and if anyone's on the phone who can correct me, please do so, but the FTP system requires a judge in a courtroom to physically turn it on and off. And so it is not set up for the ability of a judge on his or her laptop to work remotely and record proceedings. Now, if that's the case, does that mean that the court system will come around and say, you know what, we'll accept any of these other services for the time being, and we'll just deal with the transcript that way? Again, I don't know, but these are challenges. What about speedy trial? What about the possibility of rampant, spreading of COVID in a jail? Do we have all of a sudden, as they have in Europe, people in jail have to be let out because you have an overcrowding situation and you have coronavirus that's running rampant? Again, I don't know. I mean, a week ago we had one case in Colorado, and it is growing, at least presently, exponentially.
And the question my husband and I were talking about yesterday is, he's a dentist, and
Yeah.
I said to him, what policies have you guys put in place in your office to, screen people? And I said to him,
Okay.
I really like Dahlia's email, to give her some credit, about asking the questions, have you been out of the country for the last 14 days? Have you been sick? I said, why don't you guys just have your reception start asking and just reschedule automatically for 14 days out, because his company has not issued a specific policy. His answer was, well, all patients lie, so that won't help. But when it comes to dentistry, at
Just
least.
like clients.
Just
too.
like clients. But really, here was my question. I said, what would happen if somebody came in, they didn't know they were a carrier, and it gets traced back to that person passed it on to someone in the dental office. The dental office then passed it on to other patients. Granted, as a dental professional or medical professional, you wear scrubs and you wear different things to try to prohibit the virus from spreading, but could that dental office then be sued, or could that particular medical professional be somehow held liable for getting sick?
Plaintiff lawyers? I think there does become some sort of an exposure, potentially. You're right. Do medical professionals use universal precautions? They do. They should exercise that, but is that enough? Let me talk about other businesses. COVID-19, they're saying, may last as long as days, if not weeks, when someone coughs, spits, sneezes. is this the end of ride sharing? You know, is this the end of public transit for a while?
Well, they're saying the other problem is that I heard that it's actually staying in your system up to 18 days after you've already gone through the illness. So even if you've already had the associated symptoms, 18 days thereafter, you are actually still a carrier that could transmit that disease to somebody else.
So focusing back as lawyers, I get we get to remote work and talk a lot on the phone, which is what many of us do a lot anyway. But how else are you seeing people on the phone? How else do you anticipate this is going to impact your practices? And what are you doing to, adjust to this? I mean, beyond those who have employees or anybody who's an employer, clearly remote working for most people is going to be less efficient. You can monitor it. Big Brother software exists. Again, we're on Zoom. Zoom has level 4 and beyond, or version 4 and beyond has Big Brother software. If you're using Zoom, your employer can monitor you've been away for more than 30 seconds. That exists. That exists on other things. I don't know that we all want to have that. But those kinds of privacy concerns come up. Like I said, there's a lack of efficiency. If you're a generous employer and you want to pay your employees, how long can you afford to do that before you're out of business?
Does anybody have like any good analogies to other events that have happened over the course of the last 50 years that they can turn to say, well, in the case of a widespread disease, legislatures have created immunity, general immunity for something like to your husband's situation, Carolyn,
Right.
where the doctor did what they could, but they shouldn't be held accountable for a premises liability or some type of exposure that one of their patients or even their employees brought to the community. Is there anything in recent memory that you guys would say this is analogous to this situation and probably will be evaluated the same?
Nothing.
Well, I mean, I'm sure you.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Dave.
Oh, please.
No, I mean, I'm sure you could look at something on a lot of levels. You could look at, an event like Hurricane Katrina, and you could try to look at the way affected areas, New Orleans, lower Louisiana, Mississippi, how their systems, business systems, banking systems, legal systems, how those things worked when you had no ability to even get into facilities for weeks. As to the question of somehow abrogating liability for negligence based on this, I don't know that you'd want to do that. I mean, I think providers still need to be reasonable. Reasonable is the circumstances. So, I think that you'd probably think that a doctor's office that is treating patients without trying to have some precaution in place is probably not acting reasonably at this point. But you got to balance that, I guess, with the fact that at some point the doctor's offices are not going to have the physical ability to act reasonably because there will no longer be protective equipment, right? I mean, you look in Seattle, what you're hearing out of Seattle, hospitals, and if the hospitals are out, then certainly, your regular internist, you're an 80-year-old and you're going to see your internist and you have complaints, your internist doesn't probably have enough proper masks and shields and equipment to protect their employees and to protect other people in the waiting area. And you can't do everything by telemedicine either. I mean, it's just going to be the nature of how quickly this spreads, but I think it's still going to have to be gauged on a reasonableness basis.
I tend to agree with you. I mean, reasonableness, I think, makes a lot of sense. I mean, for instance, would it make sense for people who, and most of us have, thermometers of some sort, basically no-touch thermometers, to test yourself in the morning, get an idea of what your baseline is. If you're running a fever, don't go outside. Have a kind of a reasonable common courtesy. It does. For anyone that is an employer that is still open or operates a retail establishment, a business, when you see someone who looks like they're running a fever, has a dry cough, maybe time to say, go home. Because we don't want to have to close our facility. Do you close your facility? Those are challenges that are being faced by everyone. I know I happened to be at King Soopers yesterday, and while there were no groceries out there, there were, the salad bar was open, and you walk past, and sure enough, one individual was observed to be sticking her finger in, grabbing an olive and eating it. And you're just going, that's, you can't believe that, but people do ridiculous things. And we as lawyers have experienced that. You can't believe what people do, whether it's in the workplace, commercial transactions, or otherwise. But this is an ever-growing, new reality. When you have fist fights in a Target or a Walmart over toilet paper, that's different than when I grew up and you got after a neighbor by toilet paper in their house. I guess that's considered to be a kind gesture now. I don't want to make too much light of it, but it really, things are different. With that, anybody, we're coming on the hour. I don't want to go too long. I do appreciate everybody participating. I hope we found this somewhat beneficial. I really do think that these kinds of communications, these kinds of town hall meetings are going to be, at least for the short term, a bit of a new reality for how business is done. And, we're going to be, by the next time we do one of these, we're going to be much more familiar with, all of us, with the technology, how to operate it, how it best functions. And it's a little more than just a conference call.
I think we'll also have more information. One of the things I wanted to say was, while we should be cognizant of it, we're gonna have more questions than answers at this point.
We are.
And I think, given a week's time, we've already learned so much in such a short period of time. In another week's time, we're gonna be exponentially wiser as to some of these questions that have been posed and some of the dilemmas that we've identified. So maybe what we'll do is a little follow-up, whether it's an email or whether it's some type of communication saying, I've identified some of the questions that have been asked, and I'll try to reach out to some experts to see if they have any suggestions, and we'll share those with everybody.
So I want to thank everybody. Jeanine, any last words?
No, not from me. Thank you all for participating. I thought it was helpful, and it was good to keep these things around.
Joan, you still on board? She went off to more important things. So with that, unless there are any real pending questions, I want to thank everybody for their participation. And again, thanks.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Jeanine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good call, buddy.